listening to Cowley's Instructor Podcast, where the learning never stops. Welcome to Cowley's Instructor Training Podcast, and thank you for listening. So today we have a newly qualified ADI in Emma, and we're going to just have a little chat about your journey and see how you got to become an ADI. So welcome, Emma.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
That's okay. So yeah, let's just go through how your journey started, I would say. So what made you want to become a driving instructor in the first place, and maybe a bit of your background before you were a driving instructor?
Okay. So originally, I come from Norway. My mom is a driving instructor back home, but that wasn't really an option for me back in Norway, just because I'd have to go to uni. It's like a higher education, and I never wanted that. So I came to England during COVID. Wasn't really planning on staying for very long, and one day I got like a slip through my post box where it was like, "Oh, do you want to be a driving instructor?" And I was like, "Yeah, I do actually." And I started doing research and found out that actually I wouldn't have to do any sort of higher education or anything too complicated in order to get there. And I was like, okay, guess my dream is on.
I love the fact that someone just posted it through your letterbox and was just, and you were like, yeah, no, I do actually. It's good thinking, postman.
Yeah,
So I'm first of all, I'm fascinated by this idea that you have to do higher education in Norway, and it's starting to make me a bit depressed about our training system. So how does that work? I don't know if you know much about it, but I'm intrigued on how that works in Norway.
So I only know what I know from my mom, but it's basically 2 years. And then you have to go through like teaching and the maths of it, the physiques behind it, you name it, they do it. So it's basically like a more in-depth of the skills we need. But actually, looking at it now, through the training that I've had, I do actually do a lot of things the same way my mom does. And then whatever I don't do, I always just pick up from her since she's already been there.
Yeah, no, fair enough. I think yeah, it's interesting because it is a teaching qualification and it should be treated like one. Do they do practical stuff within that course then, or is it just all, so it is practical as well? Yeah, it's fascinating how like different countries do it, and maybe there's an element of if it had that sort of qualification in this country, it might be respected a little bit more, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating. So how did you find your training, or how did your training go then?
Um, I it was a little bit of it had its ups and downs. But overall, I found it really enjoyable. There were definitely things that were more complicated than the others, and I found that for me, actually watching other people do it made it a lot easier for me rather than being told how to do it, because if I can't envision it, then I'm like, okay, well, I just don't know what I'm doing. So I ended up investing in driving instructor TV, used that a lot, and basically just pretended I'm them. Whenever I'm in the car, I've been like, what would they do? And I feel like that's how I've learned the most. I feel like that's the way that works best for me, when I can sort of look and learn.
Yeah, no, I'm 100% the same actually. I whenever I want to be like improve or anything, a video works better for me, and watching someone do like an example of it is 100%.
Yeah.
It's interesting that maybe we should probably do more of that for our learners as well. I had a lesson recently that I did a little demo of roundabouts with a pupil who was actually quite competent, but it just pushed them to the next level.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's amazing how 5 minutes of watching can save an hour of trying. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, so you had the little bit of that training. So in car training, how did your part one and your part two training go when you did that?
So I originally went with a big national franchise. I did my part one and part two through them. And then once it came time to sort of consider my pink and stuff like that, I decided that a smaller school would be better for me, just because I felt like I needed a more tailored approach. I didn't want to be just one of the many. I wanted to be somewhere where I could sort of reach out and get the help that I needed when I needed it,
Mhm.
and sort of feel like I had that support for me specifically. Um, and yeah, so that's how I went about that and had a bit of in-car training, enjoyed that. But again, for me, the videos was definitely what brought me over the edge.
So I'm intrigued. How did you find your a local trainer then? Because I agree, and I think there are pros and cons to both systems, but I think a lot of people do like to go for this sort of more local approach, and you've maybe got more of a personal relationship with your trainer in that situation. But
Hmm.
how did you go about finding one? Because I can imagine you can go out and there could be two, three bad ones for two, three good ones. Or not even necessarily bad and good. It may be just they don't match your style. So how did
Yeah,
you kind of go about that finding a trainer?
honestly, I Googled and the first one I found, I was like, okay, that's the one.
Right. Good
So
research. I like it.
it wasn't anything that I put a lot of thought into. I was like, yeah, this looks good.
Enough. Well, it obviously worked out. So
Yeah, it
good.
did.
Can't be too bad a method. Yeah, fair enough. So your training then went. So you went so part one, part two with the big franchise, then moved on and got your other training. You had a little bit of like the videos. How did your
Mhm.
trainer find that? Because I'm intrigued on that, like whether so I use driving instructor TV and Go Green with my trainees, and it matches my style of training. So I never have that sort of kind of clash. However, I'm intrigued to see how maybe that style matched your trainer's style and whether they were okay with that and did that work?
Yeah, to be honest, he was very supportive of it. And with me doing it that way, I was sort of hitting a lot of the competencies through what I'd learned from the videos.
Mhm.
And then what I had questions about or what I didn't feel like I was hitting was the things that I sort of brought my trainer in for. And I was like, well, how do I solve this? Or how do I hit this competency? Or even just like getting a different perspective, like hearing it from multiple sides and sort of choosing a middle ground, deciding what was best for me. I found that was really helpful.
Yeah, no, definitely, and I agree. I think people should source their information from several places, not just one, and work out what works best for them. And I think it's really even when you are using a package like Go Green or something online, that you need that in-car training as well, because it's one thing. No, it's why I kind of asked about your mum's training, whether there was practical stuff, because I think there's a massive element of that, and I think having the understanding is fantastic, but you got to put it into practice. And to put it into practice, you kind of need someone to either coach you through it or at least say, yes, you're doing what you think you're doing, or going, well, you know it, you can talk the talk, but you're not quite walking the walk yet.
Yeah.
So yeah, definitely finding that mixture of training quite interesting, and I like that sort of kind of just bringing in lots of stuff. Um,
Yeah.
so moving on then, you I think you mentioned earlier you went on the pink.
Yeah, I did.
So how did you find those first few lessons, first few weeks of like real learners in the car?
Terrifying. Honestly, I thought I was prepared for the unexpected. Let me tell you, I was not. The unexpected is actually really unexpected. So I found it quite intimidating in the beginning, and I definitely had my pride knocked down a little bit. I went into it thinking like, "Oh, well, I'm a good driver, so I can I can easily teach." Girlie could not. But I think once I sort of got into the groove of it and once everything stopped being so scary and once I got a bit of experience with the unexpected, I think I was able to adapt quite quickly. And very early on, I did decide like I was going to be the best. Like I don't do things halfway. So in order to be the best, I had to put in the work. And through putting in the work, I got a deeper understanding. So, but the first few weeks were they were rough. They were really rough.
Yeah, I remember my first few weeks, and I was also in a city that I didn't know. Like I knew it from like to go to the shopping center, but
Yeah,
I didn't know the side roads. So I was not only scrambling around trying to teach these people to drive, but also had no idea where I was most of the time and just getting lost.
yeah.
Um, It's interesting how you mentioned a few times like the unexpected, and actually, yeah, I suppose that is probably the hardest part of those first few lessons of the they just, yeah, they really can't drive. It's not,
Yeah.
it shouldn't be surprising because they're here to learn, but you're just like, oh no, you really can't do that. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, I've always find that quite interesting. And then we talk about with training being proactive and preventing these things, but I think that's a skill in itself, noticing when to jump in, and
Yeah.
you start to pick up on the clues that your learners aren't going to do something a lot sooner with experience. So it's a hand placement on the steering wheel, or where are they looking, something like that just tells you, oh, you're not going to do this right, and then you can jump in. And it takes a bit of experience, I suppose, to do that. Do you have any funny stories from those first few lessons of where it really, like, it went Pete Tong basically?
Um, I think the first one that comes to mind, and it was actually one of those where I was like, okay, this is not the job for me. But we were driving and she didn't really have any issues with left turns. So we'd done left turns and went quite well, gear changes, everything. She was quite good. And then we did right turns instead and started off really well. And then halfway through the turn, as she was straightening up, she ended up in the opposite lane, so onto oncoming traffic. And I didn't expect it at all. And she didn't either. And rather than going for the brake, she went for the gas. So I went for the steering wheel and kind of forgot about my dual controls because I was like, oh my God, we're going to die now. But essentially, the other driver was quick. So it went okay. But that was the first and probably the last time where I was like, no, this is when we're going to die. This is it for us.
Oh, I'm sure you'll have some more in the future. They happen, but you do get better at handling them. It's an interesting thing there because actually that's something I do a session on dual controls before I let you guys loose out in the road. And that's one of the things I always train quite heavily, is because your instinct when a pupil goes wide is to grab the wheel, but actually, or even towards the curb, as if you're going to mount the curb, so they're either oversteering or understeering. The instinct's to grab the wheel because it feels like a steering positioning problem, but actually the best way to react in that scenario is to stop the car,
Yeah.
because it's going to, yeah, or at least slow it down so you've got time to correct the steering. But yeah,
Yeah,
because
I know that real fast.
if you're still doing like 30 miles an hour, steering is not going to help in that scenario. So, particularly if they're accelerating, yeah, that's yeah. Did you teach automatic or manual, or
Manual.
manual? Okay, because that can happen even more so in an auto. I think they hit the wrong pedal and we're flying down the road. Uh,
Yeah,
yeah, that's a bit scary.
it
So
was
with
very
yeah, with your training then, or your process becoming, what did you find the most challenging? Where did you get stuck?
I think risk management was for me the most difficult thing. And I also really struggled with adapting the lesson in the beginning because when I was reading through the competencies, they were all so big. So like I understood the wording of it, but I didn't understand what it actually took to hit them. So when it came to adapting, I thought, okay, like if I need to adapt, that needs to be the whole lesson changed. But it can actually be something as little as answering the questions or just adapting the route a little, having around and looking for like a speed sign. So once I sort of figured that out, that I sorted that out quite quickly once I just got the key behind it. Whereas risk management, I think for me, maybe with my age as well, and teaching people who are a lot older than me, sometimes I feel a little bit hesitant when it comes to like telling people, oh, maybe we shouldn't do that, or maybe we should do that differently. Because I was like, well, I'm just a kid. What do I know? And then I've sort of learned that actually I do know enough to be training people. So I do actually have to speak about it. And what you said, like being proactive rather than reactive. And I think still that is something that I need to work on, but I'm trying. I'm trying so hard.
Fair enough. I think, yeah, a couple of interesting. I think actually you probably nailed on what a lot of PDIs during their training struggle with, the like adapting. I think absolutely you're right. Where it doesn't have to be this big deal. It can be a sentence and you've adapted the lesson.
Mm,
So absolutely looking at that. The Yeah, the risk management is interesting. Actually, we were saying about being younger, because I qualified when I was 22, and so I had the same thing where I had a lot of pupils who were older than me. I had a lot of uni students at the time, so they're all similar age as well. So, but there was, yeah, there was this. I'd only been driving for 3, 4 years, and it was like, who am I to be doing this sort of kind of feeling. I do suffer from massive overconfidence, so I was fine. So I powered my way through with my overconfidence. So the but yeah, it's interesting, and you get that sort of imposter syndrome, I'm guessing, and yeah, and you learn over time, don't you? Sort of just kind of go, actually, I am right. I should say this. Did you ever have, and it might be on a similar sort of note, you were talking about sort of like, I suppose, sort of identifying a fault really and saying you need to try it differently.
Mm,
Did you ever have this sort of kind of, because I've heard this from PDIs before, where it's like feels like you're almost, you don't want to be horrible, you don't want to be mean by telling them they did it wrong. Um,
yeah,
yeah, and I find that quite interesting because again, I think actually if you flip it round, you're probably being nicer to tell them because
absolutely.
they're going to be upset when they fail their test or have an accident. And you
Mm,
never told me to do that differently. So in a way, you're being. So I suppose it's cruel to be kind, isn't it? And you don't have to be cruel at all. But you can twist it into a nice positive way. So how did you overcome those challenges? So it sounds like with the adapting one, you overcame it by just reading and understanding it a bit better, and you got a better understanding. But how did you overcome the um telling people what to do? I suppose.
I think it was just I think I just realized I had to. Like, it wasn't something I could choose away. It was something that I absolutely had to do in order to keep me safe and in order to keep them safe. And I think for me as well is the fact that I'm actually dealing with people's babies. So if I want to keep them alive, I do need to take my responsibility. And my responsibility, as well as teaching them how to drive, is also teaching them how not to drive. And I think once I sort of got my head around the concept of the whole being cruel to be kind, um, it just sort of loosened things up for me. I learned to give a decent shit sandwich.
Yes. Um, the Okay, fair enough. And so when you were going for your training, because I'm intrigued in this sort of like, because you obviously did quite a lot of like self awareness and self analysis. Did you, did you sort of kind of like, I don't know, maybe decide that on the weekend, like I need to sort this out? Yeah, how did you spot it was a problem in the first place? Actually, I'm intrigued.
I I think just because I was drilling myself on the competencies, I felt like I could hit most competencies quite easily. Um, and that way, it was very clear to me which ones I didn't quite hit. And even if I didn't quite hit them, I knew like this is where I can improve. So I sort of just worked my way by trying to hit the ones that I didn't hit. And then that kind of snowballed and ended up with me only hitting them once. And then I sort of just had to adapt for myself. Like I sort of treated a lesson for my learners as a lesson for myself as well. And whereas I'm giving them learning opportunities, there's also so many learning opportunities for me. And staying in the silence and sort of having the time both for them and for me to sort of reflect on what we've just done or what's just happened, and yeah, just figuring it out really.
I like it, and I like the way you've sort of used the competencies to guide your training in a way. Not necessarily as a tick box exercise, but picking one and going, I'm going to nail this one today. And you mentioned there how the other ones then kind of go out the window, and that absolutely happens. And it's about practicing one until it feels natural, then add in the layer on the other ones, and they will go up and down, but eventually it all sort of kind of comes up together. But yeah, it's a really good way of going about it is sort of like questioning yourself against those competencies and
Mm.
picking ones like your focus for the week, maybe that sort of kind of thing is really interesting way of going about it.
Yeah, and I think also when I saw that it worked, like when I adapted my teaching methods and actually seeing that either they learned way quicker or we were able to have better conversations with them reflecting rather than me telling, it was sort of like you're not just being told to do something, but you're actually seeing that what you're being told to do works. And that's the goal. So once I saw that, things started going a bit more smoothly.
Brilliant. Yeah, no, I love that. So before we move on to your actual part three, is there anything you'd wish you'd known before you started your training that you now know about the industry?
Mm, to be honest, I do feel like I had a decent understanding because when I first reached out to my national franchise, I was only 21, so they wouldn't let me start just yet. So I sort of took the time to study and figure out what I could do, both about the industry and just about the job in general. But I think one of the things that I'd probably like tell myself is the fact that sort of setting firm boundaries in the beginning will give you a reward because if you're too kind, um, it really just ends up making you miserable and probably doesn't make it really good for your learners either. So I think that's one thing that I wish I'd known more about when I first started.
It's fair enough. Yeah, like, it sounds like you did your research, and I suppose you had your mum as well to have a knowledge of how the like training pupils would go, even though it's a different system.
Hmm.
So let's move on to your part three then, because I think people will be interested to see how that went and the story of your part three. So yeah, talk to me about your part three first of all, just in general, and we'll dig a little bit deeper as we go.
Okay, so originally I had my first attempt booked in July, beginning of July, and then a couple of days before it was meant to happen, it was canceled, and then I got a new date for 28th of September. So coming up to it, I just used my resources. Really, I put in notes in my car and everything to make sure that every single lesson I was hitting at least most of the competencies, and really just looking at what I did and if that was the best way of doing it. Um, but yeah, so studied a lot. The week before, I honestly didn't sleep. I dreamt that I brought the wrong learner. I dreamt that I went to the wrong test center, that the examiner didn't show up, or that I overslept, you name it. I dreamt it. And then when I finally saw the examiner on the day, I was like, nah, I'm going to vomit now. Honestly, I felt so sick. But I think for me, I know that I'm not very good with tests. I hate being assessed. I don't like being watched. So I knew that I wasn't going to do my best work. So my goal was to make sure that on a day-to-day basis, I know everything so well that when it goes pear-shaped on my part three, it's still good enough. And that worked out.
Fair enough. Did you do anything like like specifically for those nerves? Did you like seek any training around anxiety or anything, or just your normal way of handling these things?
I mean, I cried a little. I called my mom a couple of times. I told her I was going to give up, but I'm not a giver upper. And I think like I've always known like my goal is to be the best. And if you want to be the best, you can't give up on your first attempt. So I was like, you know what? I'm just going to have to put my big girl panties on and get through it.
Fair enough. Is it? Yeah, no, yeah. It's kind of how I'd go about it as well. Yeah, and I was just intrigued because obviously, and I like the concept of increasing that competency so that you decrease the nerves, and I think that does. I think you can be really competent at the job and still nervous, definitely. But I think if you're not competent at the job, you're going to be even more nervous. So I definitely think that's a great technique for reducing those nerves. And there are also sort of plenty. I'm just more thinking about other people who might be in the same boat. There's plenty of people out there in the industry who can help you with like techniques to sort of kind of help you in those moments of nerves. I know when I last did my standards check, I I don't know why, but I got nervous. And the and I employed some of those sort of techniques that I'd learned from those people. So I think it can be like just breathing techniques and things like that can be quite helpful in that scenario. Um, but yeah, it is terrifying when that examiner first sort of comes and says hello, isn't it? Um,
Yeah, it was nice.
and that, but yeah, they're really friendly. Well, I found that certainly my examiners around our area are really friendly. They do try and put you at ease, so it isn't this big scary person. They want you to do well. They want to sit in and see a good lesson, so they do try and put you at ease.
Yeah. And I
So,
think for me as
oh, go
well,
on.
one thing that I sort of was keeping in mind was the fact that obviously, like, sometimes you see your learners fail and you're sort of like asking them to get back up or they can do it, or you're prepping them for tests and you're like trying to manage their nerves. And I just sort of felt like, okay, I sort of have to set an example. Like I can't just be telling and then not doing. So I had them in the back of my mind.
Yeah. And I think, yeah, you're right. You give all that advice out to your learners, and it's, yeah, just apply some of that to yourself is the
Way
way
harder when
forward.
it's yourself, though.
Absolutely. I think that's probably generally in life that the advice you give to friends is harder to take for yourself, isn't it? Um, so how did you choose your pupil for your part three?
So my learner was actually the first one that I took on board when I started my pink. And I think I knew the first week that I wanted her to be my learner. And she's had some bad experiences with tests in the past. So I also was thinking that I wanted a learner where it could benefit them, because that way I would be able to take the focus out of me and think, you know what, this is going to be a good experience for them. I have a responsibility to make sure that they're comfortable. And yeah, she's very competent, but again, she's just had bad experiences in the past. So I figured she could benefit from it and that way take the focus out of me a little bit selfishly.
Fair enough. And to be fair, it should be actually. If you make the focus of the lesson on the part three, not you, or on onto the pupil, you're probably going to have a good lesson. That's what it's about. It, like, as much as you're being tested, you're being tested on making it about the pupil. So yeah, no, it's a good concept. So you said about how on your first lesson with her, you almost knew that. What was it about that lesson or that pupil that made you think this is my part three pupil?
She's just fantastic. Honestly, she's so good at reflecting, easy to sort of have conversations with. She has a lot of knowledge and she's able to fix her faults quite efficiently as well, as long as you put focus to it. So I figured I wanted someone that I didn't think would fall apart, because if they fell apart, I would fall apart because I was already falling apart. And I needed someone that I thought would be confident enough to sort of handle it. Like I didn't want to overwhelm my learner. And she sort of hit that little checklist that I'd set for myself right away. And I was like, oh, I hope she's available. And she was.
Nice. So yeah, I love that. So it's like that rapport, and you do just your pupils, the ones, and pick from that pool. I think it's probably you normally have two or three pupils. You're like, yeah, these are the guys that I want to take out with me. So what? How did you choose? Well, first of all, what did you do for your part three? What was your topic, or a goal, and how did you come about getting around to that?
So our original plan was to do planning and awareness, specifically eye scanning, sort of looking to the sides and around rather than looking far ahead. But we did actually have to adapt. It had been a while since we did have a lesson, so we ended up having to look at mini roundabouts, and we had a few hesitation faults there that we managed to fix. So on the actual thing, it says junctions.
Okay, but that's good because it's good that again you did adapt, and it sounds like from what we were talking about earlier that it was more a big adapt this time. It wasn't like I'll just incorporate this into my lesson. It was like, let's move on and let's go and have a look at these. So that was quite good. But so when you chose the eye scanning, how
Mm.
did you come about choosing that as you were going to go? Like when was that decided, and how was that decided?
So that was one of the things where she'd had a big gap, and then we'd had one lesson before my part three. And that was what I remembered she had an issue with. And I just sort of wanted to confirm that that was still relevant on that lesson that we had, which it was. So I then talked to her about it and wondered if she wanted to work on it and if she felt she needed to work on it, which she did. And I think we just came up with it because we did have a situation once where a pedestrian was walking up to the pedestrian crossing and she just missed it because she was looking too far ahead. So we really just wanted to get those sorts of effective observations in and sort of seeing not just what's happening in the road, but also on the side of the road.
Yeah, it's interesting, and it sounds like you've gone about it in the correct way of just it's what the pupil needed, not what you wanted it to teach. I do think there is sometimes an element of, well, you should be able to train anything, but there's also going to be limitations of what you can teach from the test center in 40 minutes.
Mm.
What you and again, I would also be inclined to, if you've got a particular thing you're not a fan of teaching, don't go and do that on your part three.
Yeah.
Because learners don't just need one thing. That's the other thing. So yes, there might be a need for one thing, but there might be a need for something else. So as long as it is needed and you're not forcing it on the learner, you
Mm.
can tweak that for you a little bit. But then, however, like it sounds like it happened on your part three, that it doesn't matter because it could all go out the window 2 seconds in, and you end up doing a completely different
Yeah.
subject. So, and that's crucial, and that's why it's so important to make sure that your training is up there, that you can adapt and you can teach whatever needs to be taught
Mm.
in that situation. So I'm intrigued by this because you mentioned about adapting being a thing you struggled with, and I think it is a thing that a lot of PDIs struggle with. So what happened on the part three to make you think, right, this is something we need to go and have a look at versus I'll just have a conversation about that. Yeah.
Yeah. So we got to a mini roundabout and we had the right of way, and she ended up completely stopping for traffic on our left. So I tried to sort of talk her through it, and it just ended up going a little bit pear-shaped, to be honest. But we got moving again and we had a chat about it. Asked her if she felt it was something that she needed to work on, and she was like, "Yeah, actually, I think I need a bit of a refresher." So we went and had a look and sort of broke it down into little chunks, sort of who to look for and why it might be more difficult with the mini roundabouts, because they're not necessarily coming from the right. They might be coming from straight ahead, and actually putting that into work. And yeah, she did great.
Brilliant. Yeah, I love that. And I love the fact that it's that conversation after the mini roundabout quite often decides that whether you're going to go and adapt, because it sounded like she had a lack of skill or understanding a little bit. So that to me says, yeah, let's go swap.
Mm.
Whereas if it was just like I don't know, my mind just went blank, actually, that might be a let's go and have another look.
Yeah.
That out, and then she nails it and she goes, yeah, I get it now. I brain fart moments or kind of thing. And I think that's really important that you don't just when you're in these scenarios, you don't put black and white answers on what you're going to adapt and when you're not going to adapt.
Mm.
Because it a lot of the time it's about why the situation happened, and if it is just a brain fart moment, you maybe just need to go revisit it. But if
Yeah.
it's actually I don't get this, why, like I don't get it, I don't understand, then it might be let's pull over and have a quick chat and then reassess what we're practicing. um
Mm.
do you think that calmed you down a bit, actually, maybe the mistake happening because you just then went into instructor mode? No, that sent you through the roof.
Not at all. I was like, oh no, this is like my worst fear. And it happened within the first 3 minutes of it. So I was like, this is it. I failed now. I was honestly, I went into a full fight or flight, I think, and I just went on complete autopilot. Like, I don't remember a lot of the things that happened on the part three. I remember the examiner was asking me about certain incidents afterwards, and I was like, right. Didn't know it, but I survived.
I've seen plenty of PDI have that staring at the examiner face from
Yeah.
old stuff, and it's yeah, it's why I like to sit in with my PDIs, either watching the lesson or at least on the debrief, because I know that in that moment it's so hard to take in information. Um,
Yeah.
so this is ironic because I'm now going to ask you what was that examiner feedback that you can't remember at all. So yeah, how did that go? Did you take anything from the examiner's feedback?
Yeah, I took so much. Honestly, my goal was just to survive my part three. It didn't really matter if I passed, it didn't matter if I failed. I just wanted to survive it. And I afterwards, I was pretty sure I had failed actually. I didn't have a good gut feeling, and there were things that sort of occurred during my part three where I was like, okay, well, I know I should have handled that, and I didn't. But I just decided like the examiner is the one that's going to know what they're going to be looking for. So I was like, I'm just going to take whatever he says on board. And a lot of the things that he brought up were things that I'd already discussed with my trainer where I knew I had weaknesses. So, such as being more proactive than reactive and things like that, and maybe digging a bit deeper, which actually I normally feel like I do quite well, but he just stressed me out. I kept seeing him in my mirror. I was like, oh my god, he's there. and I sort of didn't dig as deep as I probably normally would have. But yeah, he gave me some really good feedback where I was like, yeah, this is, and it also aligned with the things that I already knew, which was a bit of a relief for me because at least that way I know that I am sort of picking up on the things that I need to work on even by myself. Um, and he gave me some good examples, and I've tried to put it into use.
Oh, I need to know those examples now. I'm intrigued.
Just like, so we had one incident where there was a bus pulled over, and I sort of started a little bit late with my Q&A regarding, um, how long have they stayed? Do you reckon we're going to need to hold back? And we sort of ended up stopping when we didn't necessarily need to. And he was like, just when you see it, start questioning about it. Because obviously I see it way before they do. And
Mm.
I'm thinking about it. I'm just not saying it. And those are things that I know I need to work on anyways. Because a lot of the things I'll see, I won't necessarily say. And for me, what's actually helped me with that is where you've probably heard of see it, say it, sort it. That hasn't really made sense to me. So what I've done is see it, say it, then handle it. Whether that's going to be how they're going to handle it or how I'm going to handle it, sort of put that into use. And when I've started thinking about it like that, it's actually gone quite well.
I love I love that because I think see it, say it, sort it is normally referring to fixing a fault. So you
Yeah.
fix the fault, you say the fault, you sort the fault.
Mhm.
And that's very retrospective. And I do, and which is why I don't overly train it, use it in my training. But I do like the way you've twisted it round to being proactive. Like I see something ahead of us, I say about it, and then we handle it together. Basically, I love the fact you've turned that into a proactive thing. I think quite often in that bus situation is quite interesting because I think you can fall into the trap of wasting questions in that
Hmm.
moment as well. Classic one I see people use is what Lou Walsh used to always describe as the toddler question of
Yeah.
what can you see ahead? And
Yeah.
literally my 2-year-old could go bus. Uh, so it's a waste of a question. Everyone can see the bus. It's about how are you going to handle that bus and getting those questions in, or give me 2 reasons we're going to overtake that bus.
Yeah.
In questions like that that get them thinking, like you said, early enough. So by the
Hmm.
time we get there, they've decided whether they're overtaking the bus or holding back. So yeah, that's a good thing to sort of kind of be practicing. But I do like this idea of and great from the examiner. And this is what I think is so crucial to like maybe even ask them if you can record it or whatever. It's just like I don't know if they would let you, but it's that information is crucial from the examiners because they're not trainers, but they know what they're looking for, and so they're great at sort of kind of imparting that onto you guys. And that sort of starting earlier is probably something that a lot of PDIs need to do. It's
Yeah.
crucial. And I don't think I've met many PDIs that haven't needed that start earlier, talk earlier.
Hmm.
Um, so anything else about your part 3 you wanted to discuss or moments that happened?
No, to be honest, like I said, I sort of blanked out, but when you mentioned those things, I was like, okay, that makes sense, and I could kind of put it into use. But honestly, my examiner was great, and I think the thing about when you do the job is that a lot of the time you'll probably get used to doing things a bit wrong or not quite like you should do on a part 3. So actually having an examiner who doesn't necessarily have the teaching experience and can just objectively say what they're looking for, I found was really beneficial for me.
Oh, I like that. So we're not seeing the examiners as scary people anymore. They're people who can offer advice.
It's still scary, but they do offer advice.
Yeah. Yeah, okay, fair enough. They are scary. Yeah. So now you've qualified, and I think you've alluded to this a little bit in saying that you want to be the best, and I love that attitude, and I'm always have the similar. I think mine's like and you may be similar to this, and it just might be the way you're phrasing it. I'm not like I want to be the best. I want to be the best me, is sort of kind of thing. So because I can't control being the best because I don't know how good someone else is going to be, but I can be my best. And always looking for sort of kind of continuously improving in a way. That's kind of why I'm doing this podcast, because it's great to chat to you guys and some of the trainers, but it's free CPD for me, so that's great. and I've learned stuff listening to you today that I might go and put in with my PDIs and training. So that's great. So what's next for you? Now you've qualified, once you've settled down and it's sunk in.
Well, I am going to be the best, not just the best me. I'm going to be the best. I'm
Right.
going to be like, in 5 years, I'm going to be up there with the best. Everyone's going to know my name. I'm going to revolutionize the industry. I'm going to make sure that every single learner gets a tailored, safe approach. I don't want anyone to have like a bad experience about an instructor. So that's the goal. And there really is no plan B. I'm going to be the best.
I love it. I love it. Yeah. Well, I look forward to seeing that.
I
Uh,
look forward to showing it.
yeah, no, that's fantastic. Have you? So I love the massive goal. And have you have you got a plan? Have you got a way? Have you started thinking how am I going to go about that?
Well, at first, I'm just going to make sure that I'm the best I can be with my learners and make sure that I'm sort of giving them what they need, regardless of um, how they learn or when they learn. Like, I just want to be able to make sure that every single learner with me has a good, tailored approach to themselves. Once I meet that goal, I'm probably going to start training instructors. Like, I really do want to do that. I want to make a difference. And I think also there's so much poor training out there. And I feel like a lot of the time it sort of gets drilled into our heads that we need to make a client centered approach for our learners. But I don't always feel like that's the same case for us as instructors or as PDIs. And I think that for me is something that I'm really passionate about figuring out something that actually really works for us as well individually, and not just based off of hitting the competencies or based off of the fact that you're a great driver, but actually understanding the depth of it, I think is really important.
I love it. Yeah, and it sounds like, just talking to you today, it sounds like that you will be able to do that. um, so definitely. Yeah. Okay. So, well, thank you for coming and talking to me today. I didn't know your story before we chatted, and I found it really interesting. So, yeah, thank you very much.
It's been lovely.
Cowley's Instructor Podcast, where the learning never stops.